Thank you all for standing by, and welcome to our January webinar entitled Movement of Climate Change Knowledge Through Social Networks. These webinars are an initiative of the Ohio State University Climate Change Outreach Team, a multi-developmental effort within our university led by Ohio Sea Grant, Office of Research, Ohio Supercomputer, OSU Extension, and several other OSU departments to help localize the climate change issue for Ohioans and Great Lakes residents. I am Jill Gentis-Banicki from Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory, and joining me today is Dr. Ken Frank from Michigan State University. Dr. Frank is a professor in counseling, educational psychology, and special education, as well as in fisheries and wildlife, and an adjunct in sociology at Michigan State University. His interests include the study of schools as social organizations and the social embeddedness of natural resource use. Dr. Frank's current projects include a study of the effects of the Michigan Merit Curriculum on educational outcomes and how knowledge about climate change diffuses to policymakers and educators. We are delighted to have Dr. Frank here today to explain how climate change information is relayed to different types of people and how effective these pathways are. But before we get started, a few logistical issues. During our presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Afterwards, I'll conduct a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen, and I will collect and pose your questions out to Dr. Frank at the end of his presentation. We have nearly 200 participants on this webinar so far, a great diverse group representing governmental agencies, academia, and nonprofit groups from the Great Lakes and around the country. Please keep those questions coming throughout the presentation. We should have a great Q&A session. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted onto our website for later viewing. Also, we will post a webinar survey in the chat feature toward the end of the hour. Please take a few minutes after the webinar to fill out that survey. It will help us continue to bring you better webinars. So without any further delay, I would like to introduce Dr. Ken Frank, who will present movement of climate change knowledge through social networks. Dr. Frank, I'm going to unmute you, so 1 second. All right, you should be unmuted.
Thank you.
I am going to get your presentation up and pass you the ball.
All right. Thank you very much, Jill, for the introduction. I am very excited to be here and to present this and interact with the folks out there on the webinar. And I will mention that this work is in conjunction with my graduate student, Ting Chao Chen, who will be joining me in just a little bit. We got a little bit of weather issues going on here in Michigan, and I know where she is. She's at an event related to this, related to our research. Our work is sponsored by GLESA, and so we thank them very much, and we are part of the GLESA group. Without that, without anything further, I'll take you into the presentation. So we are thinking about the movement of knowledge or the diffusion and transformation of climate change knowledge through social networks. There's the little promo that you might have read. I've adapted in typical academic style just a little bit as we go through, but I think it'll be fairly straightforward. So the outline of the talk here is that I'm going to take you into our work. So I'm going to show you some published work, recently published about a year ago, and then I will and that work concerns people who co-authored documents about climate change in the Great Lakes and how the pattern of their participation might have affected their policy-oriented behavior. And then I will take you into our current work, which has to do with networks of mediators between the physical science and stakeholders and end users, people who are playing that role, and then and how those networks might shape the diffusion of knowledge. We'll take you into some of the network diagrams related to that. And then at the very end, I'm going to ask you to participate in a survey. I'll point you to a survey we have online, and then tell you where we're going with our future work. And I want you to know that we are sort of in the middle of phase 2. So some of this is preliminary or speculative. And that's partly why we're interacting with a lot of folks to learn as much as we can. So the first part that I'll show you is from our phase 1 of our work. It's a paper we published in 2012 having to do with networks, people who co-author documents on climate change, and the relationship between network location and engagement in policy-oriented behavior. And so I know it's a little jarring for me to be talking generally about networks abstractly, and so I'll take you into it. You'll get a feel for what we did. So this is a picture of a network. You've seen perhaps some pictures like this before, but this one has some unusual features, and so I'll take you into it. Each circle here represents a person, somebody who co-authored 2 or more documents about climate change in the Great Lakes region, roughly between 1997 and 2010. Each square turned on its side, looks like a diamond, represents a document that was written. This is the 4th assessment, I believe. Some of these might be the Chicago Climate Action Plan. And generally you might get the idea that each line then represents a person who co-authored a particular document. And we see here 3 clusters of participation. Yes, you can participate in documents outside of your cluster, but there's a much greater likelihood that you will co-author a document within your cluster. The clusters were identified by a particular computer algorithm that I've written with Sam Field. And so what we try to do is find the shape, the structure of the network that emerges based on the pattern of document participation. One thing you can pick up substantively is that you see that there was a group here that kind of emerged in early, around 2000, late 1900s, 2000. They authored a couple of documents together. And then a bit later on, you have these other 2 groups emerged. The warmer colors, if you will, are more recent. And so these other 2 groups emerged, co-authoring different types of documents. Moving more into maybe policy-oriented documents and sponsored by municipalities. You can also get a feel for the fact that how participation changed over time. Somewhat of interest to us, and you'll see this a little bit again later, is that you start to get a little bit more diversity in terms of sector participation later on. Earlier on, it's mostly academic and government, a little bit private, and then later on you see the NGOs and things like that start to come in. Okay, so that's nice. You got these 3 little clusters. There's a social structure out there. What does that matter? What does that have to do with anything? And we'll take you in that direction. On the next slide, I'll show you the specific documents and their titles, just in case you wanted to get a feel for what the documents were. Each is a number on the previous slide, and then you can see the various documents that we have been analyzing. Okay. So there are 3 clusters. There is a tendency toward clustering in the data, and I showed you about the sector participation. And then what we're really going to do is we're going to focus on the how to define a person's role relative to the clusters. So what we're looking for in particular is someone who bridges, who is in one cluster but participates in documents in a different cluster. And there's a lot of sociological theory that would say this person who bridges, such as actor 259 or 728 over here, someone who bridges has unique opportunities based on the resources they can get in the social structure. They can get unique information. They will have exposure to diverse audiences. They will have opportunities to interact with people of different backgrounds and orientations, which all in all should make them a little bit more versatile and give them the capacity for greater action. And that's what we want to test in the data. That is what we tested in the data. And so to test it, what we're going to do is we have 2 measures. One is of the extent to which any of these actors engages in what we call political advocacy. And you can see here it's defined. This is somebody who's participating in public events, meetings, that sort of thing. And when they do so, the public record indicates that they were engaged in advocacy behavior. Advocacy here would be doing a BBC interview, and in the course of the interview saying, because of the findings about climate change, we've got to do something now. We have to reduce CO2 emissions. We have to get federal governments involved, etc. That's somebody who has moved away from their, who's extended beyond their scientific role and hat to engage in more of the political discourse. Okay, so that's political advocacy. Political advising is a little bit lower key. It's somebody who's going to show up at a lot of meetings, maybe advisory panels, and when they do so, they'll go beyond just testifying on their own particular scientific findings. They might synthesize the field and with an eye towards informing policy. So they're going to do more than just writing their scientific paper. Each of these measures we obtained data from basically public documents, web pages, that sort of thing, and we were able to code each of the people in our network on these measures on a scale from 0 to 4. 4 is you do these things a lot, 0 is you don't do much of it at all. And then the question we're going to ask is, are the people who bridge, do they engage in more policy-oriented behavior than the people who are more purely embedded in a single cluster? And the answer is yes. The people who bridge between clusters were more likely to be engaged in political advising, and we have some statistical evidence here. So we look for statistical significance, and in fact, these would be, you could call it highly statistically significant, very strong evidence. Even controlling for which group you're in and which sector, grouping cluster, which cluster you're in and which sector you come from, nonprofit or government, etc. Even controlling for that, there's still a very strong relationship between being a bridger and engaging in policy advocacy. There's also a strong relationship between being a bridger and engaging in policy advising. And again, even if we control for some alternative explanations, the evidence is quite strong. So, okay, so that's kind of interesting. It suggests that one's location in the social structure is related to a policy-oriented behavior. Most people think of policy-oriented behavior as something that comes from the individual. It's a particular trait, a particular drive. But what we're saying here is that, yes, the individual trait or drive is important, but you also have to be in a particular place and time or particular social space in order to have the opportunities to engage in the policy-oriented behavior. It's possible to engage in policy-oriented behavior if you're not a bridger, but it's a lot easier if you are. And if you're interested in some of the nuance here, the evidence here is, we could debate, but about as strong as some of the evidence you see for climate change. And also, we did explore how sensitive our findings were to the relocation of a few actors who were sort of on the edge of one group, and you would still come away with the same inferences. Here you have a non-bridger, someone who really authors documents within a single cluster, talking about their insular experience and the implications of that. So they're quite aware. If you read this, I'll give you a moment and I'll take a drink. You can read that and get a sense for how it is for them. On the other hand, a lot of people couldn't locate themselves in a social structure. This actor here tells us he doesn't really know where he is. He just kind of goes to some meetings, authors some documents. He's not even aware if there's a social structure out there. And so that's part of the role of the social scientist in this case, to identify the social structure and then to relate behavior to that social structure. All right, well, so what policy implications are there from this work? Well, if you're a change agent, if you're somebody who could potentially convene people, then you are not only convening people to write a particular document, but you are participating in the social structure that could emerge. You might want to think about who you're inviting in terms of creating capacity for bridging, invite some people who are a little bit out of your comfort zone, and as you do so, those people who do bridge might gain the opportunities to engage in more policy-oriented behavior. There's also this idea I've been developing, and you'll see it a little bit later again, of enhanced serendipity. So a lot of this is serendipitous in the sense of, oh, you wound up participating in this document, sort of by a quirk. You happen to be in the right place at the right time. And so there are certain tendencies that just kind of come up. And yet, from the outside, if we watch where people are going via their own choices, their own opportunities, then as a change agent, you can kind of enhance that and say, well, we want to actually create some new opportunities. You'll see more of that later on. Okay. I will now transition into the second phase of our work, which is, again, more preliminary. And we're going to ask 4 or 5 questions here. And it's changing the context just a little bit. So the questions we're going to ask are, how is knowledge about climate change transformed as it diffuses through the social structure? And I'll be defining terms a little bit as I go. What are the social structures through which knowledge diffuses? And by social structure, I mean networks, the configuration of the networks. How do social structures shape the flow of knowledge? How do the roles different people play in the diffusion of knowledge relate to their location in the social structure? That's a question we just asked for the scientists. And how are opportunities for interaction structured by institutional forces? The slightly different aspect of this work is that now we're shifting a little bit away from the scientists and downstream, if you will, to the people who are responsible for translating or mediating knowledge generated by physical scientists to practitioners. We're still focused in the Great Lakes region. And so my sense is, from looking at the roster of people on this webinar, that many of you play this mediating role. This would include an extension agent, an educator, something like that. Good. Within this context, as we move forward, we're going to be focusing on perceptions of lake levels in the Great Lakes and also frequency of freeze-thaw cycles. And I got to tell you, in Michigan, as I drove over here, those potholes, someone just took like a can opener to the road and opened them up. So we're seeing those freeze-thaw cycles doing what they do. So it's quite relevant these days. Okay, that's a little bit where we're going. We'll focus a little bit more right now on the social structure. So first question, how is knowledge transformed as it diffuses through the social structure? And what we did was we interviewed 10 to 15 people. We've talked to a bunch of other people on the side, a little bit less formally, and we've been asking them where they learned about certain aspects related to climate change, and then who they talk to, the role they play in the diffusion process. And one of the things we've discovered is that there can be a disconnect from the language and models of climate change as people play this role in diffusion. So an example would be an extension agent, when they talk to certain groups of stakeholders, might never use the language of climate change, and might not refer to explicit models developed based on climate change. And this is, for the most part, quite deliberate. It's called code switching to social scientists, and you do it typically so that you can fit in a context, so that you're heard in a given context, so that you can continue participating in that context even after you've said your piece. And there are a couple of implications of this. One implication is that end users, practitioners, etc., may not know that the knowledge they are learning about is associated with climate change. They might learn of a prediction about precipitation or weather pattern, temperature patterns, and might not affiliate with climate change. So that makes, on one end, that has implications for that person's understanding of the driving forces of the phenomenon. For a social scientist, it poses an interesting challenge to us. We are used to studying things that carry the same name and typically the same language as they diffuse, such as information about a corn seed or something like that. When the knowledge is changing its name and changing its language, it makes it a challenge for us to track it, to trace how it diffuses. But that's part of what we think we will be able to do with some good work. Another implication of another way that knowledge is transformed is it's localized. So what we might see is that a particular set of models would predict that flooding would increase in a certain part of Ohio or something like that. And then when the mediator conveys that to some practitioners, they might show a picture of a particular local river and say, well, this river, is likely to flood, much more likely to flood than it used to be. And then they'll show a picture of that river flooding. Now, is the prediction specific to that river? No. The prediction's more general than that, but the mediator is inclined to localize the presentation. Okay, so that's sort of a quick glimpse of question one: how is knowledge transformed as it diffuses through the social structure? Second question: what are the social structures through which knowledge diffuses? And in particular, we see two different types of structures that have different regional base. One is the wiki social structure. This is one associated with Wisconsin, and later on I'll have a hot link to this in my PowerPoint, and I'll show you what it looks like. And a second, so the wiki structure is sort of web-based user groups, all linked to a common website and platform. In contrast, as you move east of Wisconsin, and in particular in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and New York a little bit, what you're going to see is not this set of user groups anchored to a specific website, but instead a little bit more organic, emergent network phenomenon that comes up through participation in various types of events or venues. An event or venue here could be a document that was written, or a biweekly meeting sponsored by NOAA, or this webinar could even count as one such venue, although this webinar is bigger than just about any venue we would typically look at. Okay, so I will show you what these different social structures look like. Our ultimate goal is to understand how the social structure relates to knowledge diffusion. We're not quite ready to respond to that yet, but we can show you what the social structures look like. So the wiki social structure looks, if you go to the wiki page, and there's a hot link right here if you choose to click on it, and you will see that they have several working groups anchored to this page. Some of them are geographic based, others are action based, and others are based on certain, like wildlife. They're based on certain natural phenomena. So, and people can participate in more than one of these working groups, and there's sort of a whole structure underlying these working groups. They do participate in face-to-face meetings, as you see up here. But the organization is one that there is sort of a central organization behind this. They are linked and they're anchored by this web page. These folks have been at it a long time, relatively speaking, and they're quite good at what they do in terms of organizing and engaging people. And so this is one way people, especially in Wisconsin, Minnesota, et cetera, in that part of the Great Lakes region, would learn about information about climate change. Now we'll contrast that with the more emergent network that applies more as you move east of Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, that sort of thing, Indiana. And here what we have is a network diagram. Each circle here represents a person. Each square represents an event. An event might be one here, such as at NOAA 5. This is the 5th meeting in our data set sponsored by NOAA. And for each, and then the lines indicate people who participated in those events. Ting Chao worked very hard to code each person here to tell you what sector they work in, a government agency, a nonprofit, that sort of thing. What you're looking at here is the structure circa 2009, and you see two subgroups. The colors indicate subgroups. They're overlapping. I'll call them subgroups or clusters. They're overlapping. You really have a small region here that's emergent in 2009. In 2010, you get this, the Great Lakes Cities Climate Adaptation Integrated Assessment Meeting, which starts to bring in some different types of actors, although some of the members of who participated in these events up here also participated in this Adapt 10 meeting. So you start to see the network spreading out a little bit. Another cluster is starting to emerge, the pink one. Then we see 2009 to 2011, the pink one is really kind of manifest. The black cluster here is starting to expand over with the GLISA-sponsored event. And NOAA itself is sponsoring events with deliberately intended to bridge across these different social regions. And then finally in 2012, you have sort of the full data set with all the events, all the sponsors of the events listed here. And what's interesting here is now you have this green cluster starting to emerge as well as the pink one. And with the green one, you get more participation from the nonprofits, the NGOs. And so they're starting to get involved. Earlier on, it was more government agency and academic. And interesting, it's the same pattern, if you recall, that we saw with the climate scientists, that first the baseline was established probably through federal government funding or international funding with a core set of people, and then over time you get you get more participation, broader participation, and sort of new clusters of people emerging around different types of events. Okay, so now we've seen two different types of social structures. We've seen one, this is an emergent social structure. No one person or organization controls what the shape of the social structure will be when it finally emerges. In contrast, the wiki social structure, I don't want to say one person controls it, but a relatively small number of people are able to in shape the social structure that will emerge. They are the ones who create a new working group or that sort of thing. So you get two very different types of social structures. And I've kind of then have some hypotheses here about the implications of these different social structures. And these are just hypotheses. We don't have great data to support this because we don't have the information that we need, although we're in the process of gathering it. All right, so what might you get from the wiki structure? Well, you'd expect to get more direct access to original sources because you could be in one of these working groups with the climate scientists who wrote the paper. You will get less repeated exposures. So you might be in one or two working groups, and those will really dominate the access that you have to information. And so you'll hear about a new paper once or maybe twice, but you won't be hearing about it from all sides, as you show up at the next meeting and the next. Now, some of this, I just got a funny beep on my phone. I hope everyone can still hear me.
It's all good, yes. Just keep going.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. There's also, though, less chance of exposure to knowledge outside of the regular access points. You're going to get your knowledge through certain working groups. And, it's not so restricted. Some people, will go to many working groups or more informal. But in general, you have a few access points, and you're really going to work those access points. And your sense-making of the knowledge that you have is going to occur within your regular access points, within your working groups. Contrast that with the emergent network that we see east of the Wisconsin area. In this case, you might not have as much direct access to original sources. You might have some, but the chances that you'll show up at a meeting with the climate scientist who wrote a particular paper are smaller. But you will have redundant exposures. You might go to several meetings over the course of 6 months or a year and hear about the same paper or a related set of papers from multiple people through multiple presentations. So that will affect maybe your retention. You might learn it more or deeper. It will also affect your sense making because there will be different people around you shaping your interpretation of the findings. And also within the emergent network, you're going to have more serendipitous exposures. And yes, I had to look up how to spell serendipitous. I was having trouble there. But you'll have more serendipitous exposures where you just happen to show up at a meeting and they just happen to be mentioning a particular paper or a particular phenomenon that's being reported. And if you didn't show up at that meeting, you might not get it. Okay, so so those are some hypotheses, some speculation about the differences in the social structure and their implications. And which one's better? Well, who knows? But if you put on an ecosystem metaphor, the wiki structure is more efficient. The emergent network structure has more redundancy built into it. This might make it more resilient. You could lose any one link or two links in the emergent network structure and still have a decent chance of exposure to most information. So beyond that, we're not really ready to speculate, but it can get you thinking about where you might be located in the social structure. We'll talk more about that in a minute or two. All right. Fourth question, how do the roles different people play in the diffusion of knowledge relate to their location in the social structure? These are just questions for right now. Do those who bridge within the social structure play more active roles in diffusing knowledge to the general public? They might have more opportunities. They might, to engage the general public, they might develop more versatile language. The bridging role might reflect a certain personality type. And really what we're doing here is we're mirroring the hypotheses from the first phase of the study. So if we go back up, one of the things we want to know is a person, let's say person 49 here, who's able to attend events in many different clusters and attends many events, does that give them a better platform to then go out and talk to stakeholders, policymakers, the whole shot? So we will be exploring that. Okay, our last preliminary finding is how are the opportunities for interaction structured by institutional forces? And I've been talking about the wiki social structure, and I'm calling it GLEASE over here maybe. It's just a better word, is east of Wisconsin. This I know is a very complicated picture, tough to look at. What if you're able to get out the magnifying glass and look kind of closely, what you might notice, what you'd be able to notice is that for the most part, the people who participate in the events that I've shown you, the NOAA-sponsored events, the emergent social structure, the people who participate in that do not participate in the work groups sponsored by Wiki, and vice versa. The people who are engaged in the working groups sponsored by Wiki are not participating in some of the meetings, the biweekly meetings, and the more emergent social structure that we find east of Wisconsin. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule. I'm sure there are people listening to me right now who are saying, oh, I participate in the working groups, and I've been to some of these meetings, and I get that. It's not a hard and fast rule. But it's just a tendency. And then we asked, how did that tendency come about? Wiki did some great work, getting themselves really well established. They've been very, very thoughtful and impressive in the way they've cultivated participation. They kind of had that engine going. And then NOAA and some other institutions have sponsored events outside of that region. And so these forces, the Wisconsin folks and the NOAA folks and others who have sponsored those events have kind of created a social structure, these differences in the social structure. Can this be overcome? Sure. You can get people moving back and forth, and that there could be great value to that. But at least as we see it now, you're likely to get two diffusion processes, one here and one here. All right. I think I've said all this that's on the slides. We don't know the implications of these differences yet for knowledge flow, because in order to know that, we need to know what each person is thinking about lake levels and about freeze-thaw cycles in particular that we've chosen to track. And then once we know what people have learned about lake levels and freeze-thaw cycles, we'll be able to go back and relate their knowledge to their location in the social structure. All right. So a little recap, and then as a way to move forward, what are we learning within Phase 2? Knowledge is transformed as it diffuses. I think we've heard informally and formally through our interviews that it's a consistent theme. Many people are actively doing this. Is everybody doing it? No. Some people are very, very true to the original language of the scientific findings, but most people try to adapt to their setting as they convey the findings. We do see two different types of social structures. I think we're pretty confident in that. One more designed, taking advantage of the web platform. Still plenty of emergent, phenomena within that. It's not like people are told to participate here or there, but it's more designed. And the other is more emergent, where lots of different actors are creating lots of different opportunities for participation, and then people choose which events they're going to show up at. And through those choices, a social structure emerges. And we also, I think it's pretty clear that the structures are shaped by institutional forces that are sponsoring these events, but also have established essentially brand names or, places to go that are touchstones for entering the conversations about climate change. If we look across our two studies to the moment, this is more for me, the sociologist, but what we think about is that in general, there's oftentimes clustering in network phenomenon. People tend to cluster because they have because they have common interests, because they have limited opportunities for engaging in interactions, maybe for regional basis. And so there's often clustering, and you might well be shaped by the people within your cluster, true, but relative to the clusters, sometimes the real action is with the bridgers, the people who are able to go between clusters and access the diverse knowledge. Not everybody can do this. It's demanding in terms of cognitively, in terms of your time. You have to have a certain disposition for it, and you have to have certain opportunities. But for the people who do engage in bridging, they might have opportunities to be involved politically and also to be important players in the diffusion of knowledge. Okay, practical implications. And, when we rehearsed this, Jill was, really wanted me to attend to the practical implications, and my guess is I haven't done that enough for you, but I'll try to do it a little bit more, and then maybe we can have some Q&A on that. So, what I'd like to get, I don't have a prediction for you about precipitation in 8 years that could change the way what you want to do with your land. That's just not the business I'm in. That stuff is important. I wish I could do it at times, but I can't. But what I can do is to help you understand that there is an ecology out there that produces the information to which you are exposed. There's networks of people interacting who are conveying the knowledge, who are transforming it, shaping it, and even sometimes creating new knowledge. And that network, that process is changing. It's dynamic. Whether you're looking at the wiki side of things or the more emergent structure, they're both changing and dynamic. And so there was a whole, if you will, social apparatus that produced the person in front of you who's telling you about some recent findings about freeze-thaw cycles or lake levels or something like that. So just your awareness that it wasn't solely just a single person who chose to come forward and that there was a process for shaping it is important. The second thing is that you could have heard about particular findings through multiple trajectories. I won't say an infinite number, but multiple, and those different trajectories could have shaped the knowledge differently. So when you hear a particular finding, it has happened that some people said, oh yeah, the finding is really strong, it must be true, when in fact, because I've heard it 3 times or 4 times. In fact, if you traced it back, it turned out it was one finding that had gone through different channels to get to the same person 4 different times. So if you hear it 4 times, that doesn't necessarily make it 4 times stronger. You would want to think about, is that the same finding through 4 different sources, or through 4 different channels. And this ties back, the difficulty in tracing this ties back to the reluctance or the discomfort that sometimes we have with linking to the scientific reference that's a basis for presentation a translator or mediator is giving. We don't always give the full paper references. We don't always want to. And so sometimes it can create this odd phenomenon that you hear about things through multiple sources. You hear about the same finding multiple ways, and you think it's multiple findings, but it's only a single finding. All right. For your particular action, what could you do? If you're getting information from, you could seek to get information from multiple sources, as well as through multiple channels. So, you could say, well, I heard about this prediction about precipitation, and see if you can figure out what the source is. And then once you have that, then see if you can learn something else about precipitation prediction that comes from a different source. And you might be relying on people who can mediate to help you understand those sources or to provide you with those sources. But I guess I'm trying to encourage you to be an aggressive consumer. If this were the medical industry and you had a disease, if this were health related, you would probably start Googling around and checking out, this paper, that paper about the disease you have. You wouldn't just go to the Mayo Clinic website. You'd probably be more expansive than that. And so I'm trying to encourage the same behavior here. Okay, I'm wrapping up now. Next steps, we've been interviewing people, and then what we really want to do is survey people to learn what they believe to be the case about lake levels changing in the future and freeze-thaw cycles in the future. So that we can then link people's perceptions of lake levels and freeze-thaw to where they might have heard about these things in terms of what conferences they've been to, what events they've participated in, that sort of thing. So we are very much in the field conducting our survey. We've administered it at a couple of meetings. We've got now the online version, and we hope that you will take the time to fill it out. There's a kind of a short version, which I think I can safely say is 5 to 7 minutes. And then at the end of it, there's an extension that would actually ask your direct network data. That will take a few more minutes. We're also working with Maria Lemos and Scott Kalifatis to look at the documents that people co-wrote together and treat them as artifacts and use them to understand what was known, how was it written about, what language was used. We're also trying to coordinate with other RISAs. I'm with AGLISA, and the RISAs are regional centers sponsored by NOAA, and other organizations we're working with who are interested in doing network studies. And then in the future, in about a year from now, what we hope to do is spend more time with stakeholders. Not every stakeholder who ever talked to anybody in our current network, but a subset of stakeholders who learned about issues related to climate change in the Great Lakes from some of the people we are studying now. And we'd like to learn what other sources those stakeholders go to, how they make sense of the knowledge that they are accessing, and that sort of thing. That takes us to our conclusion here. So we want to have a conversation. We as part of the Q&A, we want to know where you get information from about climate change, about lake levels in the Great Lakes, about freeze-thaw cycles. We've chosen these two. I'll be explicit here. We think that there's some information about lake levels that has circulated. Not everybody's gotten it, but it has sort of been on the table for a year or two. The freeze-thaw cycles we know are newer. We're trying to get baseline and then we want to be able to follow up and see how things are changing. We'd like to know what sources you go to, and how does your knowledge vary by source. We'd love to know if we're missing a key aspect of the knowledge flow. Oh, Ken, you idiot, don't you know about these 2 big conferences that take place every year in such and such location, and it's where everybody gets all their knowledge from? If there is such a thing, we'd like to be pointed to it. We've been at this a little while now, so I'm hoping that's not the case, but any other conduits, places where knowledge is being exchanged, we'd like to hear about. And then here's a little link to our survey. I'm sure I haven't been subtle on this, so we're hoping that you take the time to fill it out. You can click either here or cut and paste the link, the URL into a browser, and take our survey. It should take 5 to 7 minutes. All right, that's it that I had planned. I do have other things in the slides that you could take a look at our instruments or interview protocol. But I want to stop here and engage in the Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Frank. We've gotten some great questions, so I want to just quickly start up and get as many of these questions answered as possible. We had a lot of questions dealing with bridgers. So I'm going to just go down the list, and if you can answer, that would be fantastic.
Okay.
One of the first questions that we had gotten was, did you differentiate between writing about or advocating for climate mitigation versus climate adaptation?
That's an interesting question. For the most part, the answer no would be the quick answer with some nuance. For the people that I've got up on the screen here, when they are engaging in political advocacy, it is mostly having to do with mitigation. And these are high-profile people engaging in pretty high-profile conversations, and it's back through 2009. Starting, and so really the political advocacy has to do with mitigation. More recently, you would see a mixture, and certainly some of these people were engaging in a mixture of adaptation and mitigation comments.
Okay, thank you. Another question was, did you look at the cause and effect relationship between a bridger and engaging in policy advising, and what comes first?
So very difficult to figure out the causality, and whoever asked that question is one with the reviewers of the paper who were very concerned about that issue. So what I can say is that the difficulty is that we were doing this from public documents, public records, web pages, that sort of thing. And it's difficult to figure out when somebody's political advocacy really emerged, and it's also difficult to figure out exactly when their bridging status was established. So the causality is difficult to determine, but we do have some quotes in the paper alluding to causality because we went and interviewed some people in response to the reviewers. And then, the other thing that I'll say, and I do want to be cautious about this, but, there's the argument here where there's some other factor that causes both bridging and political advocacy. It's some sort of personal trait. And what I can say is, even if half of our evidence were due to that alternative factor, we could still make the inference that bridging has an effect on political advocacy. And even if early political advocacy in part caused bridging, we could still walk away and say, yes, that's partly true, it's partly a reverse cause, but bridging also causes advocacy. And what I'll say here is, am I certain? No. Did I do a randomized experiment? No. We call this causal inference because it's an inference. It's not causal certainty. I don't know. But it would take an awful lot of evidence, an awful lot of change in our data to change the inference that we made.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we had was, again, dealing with bridgers. Is it true that bridgers are publishing more? So perhaps those that publish more and who are more knowledgeable about climate change would be more likely to engage in policy behavior. Maybe it has nothing to do with their bridging status.
So in general, it's slightly true that bridgers publish more, but we controlled for how much you published in some of our models, predicting policy advocacy, and the effect of bridging on policy advocacy and advising is still net of the amount that you publish. So yes, that could be part of the explanation, but if you look up here in this cluster, you have people who are actually participating in a whole lot of documents. And by publishing here, we're restricting ourselves to these documents. I understand that they might be publishing more academic stuff, but let's talk about these documents. These folks are publishing a lot of documents, but actually they're not doing that much bridging. The folks doing the bridging are like this person here and some people down here who bridge up here. So that might be part of the explanation, but it's not the dominant phenomenon, we think.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we had was, for those of us actively trying to reach end users of climate information, what would your recommendation be for broadening our audience and avoiding the preaching to the choir dilemma?
Wow, that's a challenge. So first of all, I have great respect for people playing that role, and as we have interviewed the people who are playing that role, they're very thoughtful about it. The best thing I could say is you are not alone in facing that challenge. So you should get together with some other folks, and my guess is you'll come up with some things that are better than what I can come up with. Okay, all that said, what I could suggest is if you are trying to broaden your audience and not just preach to the choir, I think this you do want to be sensitive to context when you engage an audience with diverse backgrounds. I think the code switching is okay. I think it's a human thing to do. It's a valuable thing to do. And so, you want to be thoughtful about your language so that you can continue to participate in a conversation, even with people who might not be like-minded people. I think also you would want to be fairly deliberate about spreading yourself geographically or in other ways. So if you're used to talking mostly to farmers and you're looking to expand, get yourself in an urban area or vice versa. And so, and when you do, I would say be cautious at first, get the hang of the place and understand the people. Most of the people you're talking to, if they showed up, are pretty thoughtful and are willing to listen and want to learn if, provided you're not sticking your finger in their eye. And then from there, that's where you can get real political traction. So I'm more optimistic than some. I know it's really challenging. I've talked to people who encounter stone walls with one perspective or another. I know it can be challenging, but most people, I'm optimistic and about how thoughtful people can be.
Okay, thank you. Another question dealing with bridgers. Are there professional similarities among the bridgers? Is this aspect of being more active as an advocate advising related in some way in their areas of study or their expertise?
Yeah, well, I'll take that a little bit broadly. There are a couple of prototypes of bridgers. So one prototype is a successful academic who has published in, whatever field they, and we're talking physical sciences here, maybe they're, whatever, meteorologist or something, they've been very successful. And then along about, 45, 50 years old, they want to change things. They want to change behavior. It is not enough for them to continue to publish academic papers. even if they've been very successful. And so then what they do is either they retain their academic posts, but clearly start putting effort into different forms of dissemination and get themselves into different venues where they can engage in the policy advocacy. Or sometimes they leave their academic post and join a nonprofit, start a nonprofit, something like that. And so in that sense, there are some professional similarities. I think that for the most part, the political advocates and advising that we saw was done by somebody who already had pretty strong credentials and was pretty accomplished in their field. I think it's difficult for somebody junior to do this. And I think also it requires, it's difficult for somebody very senior to do this. It was really people about in their mid-careers who just kind of made a decision. And then I'll also say that several of them are Canadians, and there was sort of a bubbling up of this type of activity in Canada, and I can't tell you exactly why. I could speculate that their academic identities might not be as strong as in the U.S., but I can't put my finger on it.
Okay, thank you. Another question we had was, people read about climate change in newspapers, hear and see on radio and TV. What place do they play in studying your clusters? What
place do the newspaper and TV play in my study? All right, I think I understand that. So we know that people are getting, end users, practitioners, et cetera, can get information from the popular media. But the things that we're studying here are not typically the things you would get from popular media. Prediction about lake levels, for example, well, you might get something in a particular newspaper, but if you do, quite likely that is tied back to a presentation that was given where somebody had read Brent Lofgren's paper. And so the popular media in that case, I don't think are all that independent source of knowledge flow. They're just yet another filter. And so it would be interesting for us to have journalists. In fact, I think there is at least one journalist, not in this picture, but in this picture, I think there's a journalist who specializes in climate change, if I recall, or somebody who has at least partly that role. And so in that sense, they're just another actor in the system. And extension agents often write, press releases or things for their local newspapers. And so in that sense, they're playing that kind of role as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we had was, it seems you are speaking of stakeholders who are willing to self-inform through papers and research. What about members of the public who seek out media that match their belief systems?
So, the people that we're looking at here are not necessarily end users. These people are people who would mediate between the natural science findings and the end users. And therefore, it's these people who could potentially reach somebody who is predisposed to getting information from a particular source. And the people here could be an alternative source of information. And, at some level what they're trading on, and I just keep going back to this extension agent or maybe somebody in a nonprofit, what my sense is that someone in that position does is they say, look, we contribute to your community, we understand the community, we've helped with this, that, and the other, we have this information with climate predictions that might be valuable to you, and as the conversation builds over time, the person in this role becomes more embedded in the community, and there are studies about how extension agents become embedded in their communities, and as that's the case, they do have the capacity to start a broader conversation about climate change. So that's maybe optimistic, and again, I know it's a real challenge. I know you can't always pull it off. I know about the polarization of our world. My sense is, my hope is that, I have heard enough of conversations where there is a bridging to people with different orientations, and a real conversation is being had. And I think these people, who we're studying, are the ones to initiate it if they're thoughtful about it and they're positioned to go out into their communities and play a role in broadening the conversation about climate change.
Thanks. I think we actually have run out of time. We have a few more questions, and maybe I'll end with one that we had gotten quite a few questions about, and you had answered it briefly, but maybe a little more discussion of how you chose the particular focus levels for that phase 2 research. Why freeze, thaw, and lake levels?
We chose those two, freeze, thaw, and lake levels, after having a number of conversations and being part of a number of small and larger conferences. And so we chose lake levels because there has been changing information about lake levels over the last few years, and so it's quite an active area. Our goal was to choose things that were quite active. So that's why we chose the lake levels, because it's kind of happening right now. And then the freeze-thaw cycles we chose because we think it's on the horizon. There are certain people who are quite aware of freeze-thaw cycles, like people who manage roads for municipalities are reading up on this. There was a Canadian study or two about the same latitude as Michigan that looked at freeze-thaw cycles. And so they're getting keen on it, but not everybody is. And so that's why we chose freeze-thaw cycles, because not everybody knows about it yet. But we think if we keep studying over time, we will be able to see the movement of knowledge about lake levels through the system. And then I'll just say that we chose the two to complement each other. We know not everybody is concerned about lake levels. Marina owners are way more concerned than somebody who's living in central Ohio. But between the two, we figured we would catch a lot of people's interest. So we picked them that way.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we are actually out of time, so I wanted to, again, thank Dr. Frank for his willingness to talk to us today about his research on knowledge transfer. An excellent discussion. Also, a thank you to Ohio State University, the National Sea Grant College Program, and Ohio Supercomputer for funding this webinar. I did want to remind you that our survey URL for this webinar is in the chat feature. Please take a few minutes to fill that out. I also wanted to refer you to resources and an archive of all of our previous webinar presentations, which are located on our changingclimate.osu.edu site, as well as our new regional site at greatlakesclimate.com. This webinar series is sponsored by the OSU Climate Change Outreach Team and will continue on Thursday, February 18th, with a presentation from Ohio State University's Peter Curtis about his decades of research predicting carbon storage of Great Lakes forests and the management implications. Registration is up in the chat feature, so feel free to register now for the February webinar. Thank you again to Dr. Frank and all the participants of this webinar. We hope this was beneficial and hope you'll join us again in an upcoming webinar. Thank you and have a great afternoon. Thanks, Dr. Frank.
Thank you.